This bull market is global. The last bull market in the 70s was basically North America and Western Europe only. The rest of the world was pretty much excluded. And so this one is going to be like the last one times a million. It's going to be big. It's really important that you understand how currency is created. Because money, we have to dig up out of the ground, and we've got to refine it and mint it into a coin. Currency, though, the Treasury, creates a bond. A bond is an IOU, right? Loan me $1 trillion. I promise that over the next 10 years, I'm going to pay you back that trillion plus interest. So it's basically borrowing prosperity out of the future. Loan me $1 trillion. I promise I'll pay you $2 trillion back in the future. So they have an auction, and they sell this IOU to the banks that are called primary dealers. And then the Federal Reserve shows up, and through something called open market operations, buys that bond from the banks. But then the banks go to the Treasury auction the next month, and the whole process repeats. And what this does is there's a buildup eventually of bonds at the Federal Reserve and cash at the Treasury. And then the Treasury deposits all of that currency into the various branches of the government. Our government does some deficit spending on public works, social programs, and we throw a few wars. And then all of those government employees, the government contractors, and the soldiers deposit that in their bank accounts. So now it's in the commercial banks, and now something called fractional reserve lending comes into play. And if that soldier deposits $100, the bank is legally allowed to steal 90 of it out of his account, and it still says that there's $100 there when there's really only 10, and they loan it to somebody. But why do we take out a loan? We take out a loan because we're going to buy a house or a car or some other doodad. And so the bank gives it to me. I'm going to buy a house. I pay the seller, and then the seller deposits it in his account. So if I deposited $100, the bank took 90 and lent it, and the seller deposits it in his account. Now there's $190 on deposit. And then they get to steal 90% of that, which is $81. And once whoever borrowed that currency gives it to the seller and it gets deposited, now there's $271 on deposit. And this repeats and repeats until $100 can create 1,000. And that's it. That's our currency supply. It's nothing but a couple of bucks whipped up in this hocus-pocus scam where the Federal Reserve and the Treasury get together and they swap IOUs. A check is an IOU for cash. The bond is give me some cash and I promise I'll pay it back to you someday in the future. By the way, when the Federal Reserve writes a check, there's not a penny in that account. It's always got a zero balance. Currency springs into existence as soon as the Fed hands somebody a check. So that's where the currency comes from. Every single dollar is borrowed into existence and it's owed back. So it's that scam there, and then it's a bunch of numbers that the banks typed into their computers. And that's it. There's nothing that backs the currency except IOUs. But the cruel joke comes when you work for some of this currency supply. Now it represents your blood, sweat, labor, ideas, and talent, so that you can save it up so that you can pay tax to the IRS, so the IRS can turn it over to the Treasury, so the Treasury can pay the principal and the interest on that bond that the Federal Reserve bought with a check from nothing. Don't you love this system? It's a scam. It's a pyramid scheme. But here is the big problem with this system, and the reason that we are going to be experiencing greater changes in this decade than anybody has ever seen in their lifetimes. What you're going to see in this decade is going to be astounding. There was interest due on that bond, and there was interest due on every single one of those loans that the banks made. Now, every month you make a payment to the bank. Let me ask you something. If you borrow the first dollar into existence and you say you're going to pay back $2, where do you get the second dollar if there's only $1 in existence? The answer is you have to borrow that one into existence as well and promise to pay interest on that one. So now there's $2 that exist, but you owe $4. That's the way our currency system works. There always has to be more debt in the system than there is currency to pay the debt. And we always have to go deeper into debt each month than we were last month, every year than we were last year, in order for us to move forward and have prosperity. If the politicians talk about paying down the debt and living within our means, they don't understand that that's deflationary and it'll collapse the whole economy. You cannot pay down the debt. If we just stop doing deficit spending, and if the public decides to live within their means and not borrow any more than they already have, the interest payment collapses the whole currency supply. And I'm going to show you what that looks like right here. Oh, by the way, if you didn't understand that thing, this is actually the way it works. Abracadabra. They're just whipping it up from nothing, except it's not really nothing. They indebt us in the future. They steal prosperity from our future. We have to pay tax in order to have a currency supply. You can't have a currency supply without having to tax the population. In this modern method of creating currency, we pay tax in order to have the privilege of having currency.